want to, I guess, just to share a perspective with you this morning. Very often in our Christian lives, because of the shortness of Christian meetings and gatherings together, we cover small subjects because we don't really have time to cover big ones. And sometimes we don't get things tied together because we don't have time to really do that. And so a lot of our church life and a Christian life with home meetings or whatever we're exposed to different topics of Christianity, and sometimes not to the big picture. And I've always been, since I was a very young person, I've always been the person who wants to climb to the top of the hill and see the big picture of the surrounding area and just where I am. And I remember the first days deer culling when I was young, hunting in I was professionally hunting in a particular area of the mountains of New Zealand, and the first couple of days the weather wasn't very good, but as soon as it became clear, I climbed to the highest peak to see the layout of the whole land. And since I became a Christian, I've been trying to do the same. Became a Christian when I was 22, and I've been trying to do the same, trying to see the big picture. And literally, it's taken me many, many years to try to put all the small perspective messages together and try to understand them as a whole and oversee and see what the final purpose of Christianity is, because we can get so absorbed in detail. And we need to be absorbed in detail because there's lots of important things. But in history, God is working towards a purpose. And unless we actually know that purpose and can see that clearly, we can get sidetracked off into details that aren't a part of it. We can start getting involved in different Christian endeavor, Christian understandings, Christian topics that are not actually working towards the final goal. And of course, God is always working towards the final goal. He's like an arrow, if you like. He has a determined direction and conclusion that he's working towards, and everything he does is towards that conclusion. And so if we don't know the big picture, we can often go down roads that are not of him, thinking that they're Christian. And so I want to start by reading a statement of Napoleon. You'd think, what on earth has Napoleon got to do with anything of God? Well, very little, actually. But he said some things that I think put into perspective a lot of things in this world. Because the same spirit, if you like, that was in the spirit of the great empire builders is the same spirit behind the things of this world. But probably to the epitome of it, probably to the final revealing of what the spirit of this world is. And the spirit of this world, the spirit who controls this world system, is an empire builder. He's trying to get the whole of humanity by force, manipulation, deception, and lie. He's trying to get this whole human race to go down his path and come under his power and call him Father. That's basically Satan's perspective. And the empire builders were pretty much of the same kind of spirit. Napoleon said this. This is startling his conclusion. He says, I will tell you, Alexander the Great, Caesar, Charlemagne, and myself have founded great empires. Now, he's missing out a lot of people there. I've been sort of fascinated in some ways by these people. Like Genghis Khan, Tamerlane, Shaka Zulu, the Aztecs, the Maya people, who built these great empires in their time. And the rulers, the pharaohs of Egypt, for example, who had this incredible authority and power, great forces behind them militarily, and great wealth around them, that there was nothing in their world that they could not do. They raised themselves into a place where you'd say almost that they had a freedom of lifestyle, that they could create whatever they wanted, do whatever they wanted, because anyone that got in their way, they had the authority, the power, and the freedom to just completely eliminate them, to stop them hindering what they wanted to do. In a sense, they were free. And I think in the financial world today, we see the same kind of thing, that great wealth gives you great freedom. You can do whatever you like if you have great wealth. And these guys were in the same kind of mode as that. And so when Napoleon says, Alexander, Caesar, Charlemagne, and myself have founded great empires, he's saying we rose into places of complete authority and freedom to do whatever we wished in this world, and had the forces behind us to do that. Napoleon, of course, was an extraordinary empire builder. When you look at him, his expertise as a general in battle was almost second to none. He won more battles than Julius Caesar, Alexander the Great, Shaka Zulu, all put together. He won more battles and more individual campaigns than those guys all put together. And yet you understand what Julius Caesar built with the battles that he fought. So Napoleon was probably the empire builder of empire builders, probably the nastiest person that history's brought up. I'm absolutely appalled at the person he became. Then he says, but our empires were founded on force. And by that he means, the absolute force. There's times when he would send 10,000 men into battle knowing that they would be killed. They had no hope of winning the battle. They come from places like Poland that he didn't care for anyway, and he'd send them into battle knowing that they would be destroyed, but they would weaken the enemy enough so that he could bring his more valuable troops in, then after that slaughter was over, and win the battle. It was kind of like a game of chess, but with many, many men's lives. And so we see the same kind of spirit today in this world system. I mean, the business world isn't too much different. In the world of wealth and the gaining of wealth, which is power, and which is authority and the freedom to do whatever you want to, we see the same kind of thing of building a business empire that can give you tremendous freedom. Now, we've got some wonderful people in the world today who've built incredible empires of wealth, but are using the wealth to assist countries that are in poverty and that are struggling. And we see amazing things happening within that realm. So, but the spirit of it can be, I get myself into this place of freedom first. We see it in the political world. We can, unfortunately, even see this empire building in the religious world. It's a part of the spirit of the world. So when Napoleon says this, we have founded our empires on force. He's talking about the spirit of this world. But then he says, Jesus alone founded his empire on love. And to this day, millions would die for him. Now, when Napoleon wrote this was after his whole life as an empire builder was over, and he was imprisoned, living on an island in the Atlantic Ocean. Now there's no hope of restoration of empire. His time as political leader, as general, his time is over. He's a prisoner. Now for the rest of his life, he dies there. And so he's writing this all in retrospect, looking back at his life. He says, Jesus alone founded his empire on love, and to this day, millions would die for him. He says, I think I understand something of human nature, and I tell you, all these were men, and I am a man. Jesus Christ was more than a man. He says, I have inspired millions with devotion so enthusiastic that they would have died for me. This sounds a bit egocentric, but we need to understand the reality of what it says next. He says, but to do this, it was necessary that I should be visibly present with the electric influence of my looks, my words, and my voice. In other words, he's saying my personality, the strength of my personality, and the dynamism of what I am and what I did. I enthused, how do you say, multitudes with a devotion so enthusiastic, they would have died for me, he said. Who cares for me now? Removed as I am from the active scenes of life. He's in jail on an island, and who cares? No one would die for him now, he says. Who cares for me now, removed as I am from the active scenes of life and from the presence of men? Who would die for me now? This is just years after. He says, Christ alone, across the chasm of 18 centuries, makes a demand which is beyond all others difficult to satisfy. He asks more than a father can demand of his child, or a bride of her spouse, or a man of his brother. He asks for the human heart. He will have it entirely to himself. He demands it unconditionally. And forthwith, his demand is granted by millions, 1800 years after he died. For Napoleon, short years after his time was over, who's going to die for me now? Jesus, 1800 years after he died, still has millions devoting themselves to him and would die for him. He says, wonderful. In defiance of time and space, the soul of man with all its powers and faculties becomes an annexation to the empire of Christ. This phenomenon is unaccountable. It is altogether beyond the scope of man's creative powers. Time, the great destroyer, is powerless to extinguish this sacred flame. This is what strikes me most, he says. This is what proves to me quite convincingly that Jesus Christ is God. Isn't that amazing to say that? Here's the man who I think has probably risen to the epitome, the greatest peak of human deprivation and of absolute intoxication with power and authority, to the point where he has literally murdered tens of thousands of people in a day, over and over again. And he comes to this conclusion that this kingdom, building of this force, is never going to succeed where Jesus Christ and his kingdom of love, he says there back further, Jesus alone founded his empire on love. But they founded their empires on force, manipulation, and fear. We still have those things in the world today. We still have those things even within so-called Christian life. That those kinds of things can still be the motivations for what we're doing. The overall picture for us is that God has called us out of this world, out of all of the ways of this world, out of all of the principles, the values, all of the functions and the ways it works. He's calling us out of this world to leave behind every kind of manipulation, every kind of force, every kind of spirit of this world that would build empire, greed, hanging on to insecurity, building empires of finance, building empires of political power and authority. We see it all over the world in every way. The same spirit, in different ways of expressing it, but the same spirit is still at work. You know, some years ago, I was in my early 30s, and we were pastoring a little church in a small country town in New Zealand. And a man came to live in the area where we were. He had a holiday home there, but he came to live there because his wife had left him and he'd lost his job. And so he came to live in their holiday home by the beach, close to where we were. And he was a man that most people in New Zealand would have known of in that day. He was a politician. He was an extraordinary man. He had decided to study law, had gone to England to become a lawyer and study law in the best law institutions in England. He came back to New Zealand and became a clerk in a law firm. 6 years later, he was Attorney General of the whole country. He had risen to the head of the legal